The satchel was already packed when I found her folding the last of her shawls into it, and the sight of that half-empty room struck me harder than any blade my enemies had ever raised against me. "You are leaving before the frost breaks," I said, though it was not a question. I had heard it from my own steward an hour before, spoken in the careful voice men use when they are afraid of what a king will do with bad news. Eloin did not startle. She set the shawl down with the same unhurried grace she brought to everything, smoothed its corner, and only then looked up at me. "I am leaving when the road is dry enough to travel, Ewan. That is all." That is all. As if 3 years of my life folded into 2 words could be dismissed so plainly. I stood in the doorway of the chamber I had given her in the North Tower, the one with the window that caught the first light over the pines, and I could not make my feet carry me further in, nor backward out. "Because of Sable," I said. "Because your council has waited a decade for that match, and because you have never once told them no." Her voice held no accusation. That was the worst part of it. She said it the way one reads a ledger, numbers that simply sum to what they sum to. "I will not be the reason a treaty breaks and men die on a border that has stayed quiet for 20 years. I would rather go before I am asked to." I wanted to tell her she had it wrong. I wanted to say the words simply, the way I had rehearsed them 100 times riding back from the Eastern Watch, in the dark, when the only company I kept was the ache of not having said them yet. But some old instinct duty dressed up as wisdom kept my tongue behind my teeth, and so I said something useless instead. "No one has asked you to go." "No one needs to." She latched the satchel. "That is how I know it is real, Ewan. If it required cruelty, I could fight it. It requires only quiet, and I am good at quiet." She walked past me then, close enough that I caught the scent of dried lavender she kept folded among her things, and something in me, not my mind, not my wolf, but some older and quieter part I had no name for, a warmth that had lived low in my chest since the day I met her, turned cold as river stone. I let her pass. That was my failure the first of that day. I let her pass because I did not yet understand what passing meant. It had begun, as these things do, in a kitchen doorway. 3 years before, I had ridden back from a border skirmish with my arm laid open to the bone by a raider's hook blade, and my physician had been 3 days behind the column, tending worse wounds than mine. I had staggered into the kitchens of Thistlewood Keep, looking for nothing more than water and a strip of cloth, expecting some scullery girl to flee at the sight of blood and crown both. Instead, a woman with flour on her wrists and steel in her eyes had sat me down on a stool without asking permission, sent the boy for her needle case, and stitched my arm shut by lamplight while telling me, without a flicker of deference, that I was a fool to have ridden 3 days on a wound like that instead of stopping to have it seen to. "You may address your king with more courtesy," I had said, more amused than affronted. "When my king shows more sense," she had answered, "I will consider it." I had laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in a month of border war, and something in that laugh had cracked a door I did not know was shut. I had gone back to that kitchen the next night, and the next, with excuses thinner each time, until I stopped bringing excuses at all and simply went because I wanted to sit across from Eloin and watch her hands move. She was not born to my court. Her father had been a horse doctor in the low valley towns, and she had learned her steadiness from him, how to hold still hands over something frightened and hurting. She kept house accounts for my seneschal, sat at no high table, wore no jewels my treasury had not begrudged her. And still, within a season, half my keep had noticed how the Alpha King found reasons to walk past the account rooms at dusk. I told myself it was only friendship. Then I told myself it was only fondness. By the second winter, I stopped telling myself anything at all, because there was no explaining away the way my chest eased the moment I heard her voice down a corridor, nor the way sleep came easier in a hall where I knew she was housed than in any fortress my army had ever held. There was a night that second winter I have never spoken of to anyone, not even to her. I had walked out past the kennels toward the old pine brake where the free wolves of Thistlewood still run, unclaimed and unbound to any pack law, the way my grandfather always said they had run since before the first stone of the keep was laid. A gray one, thin-ribbed from the hard season, had come out of the tree line and stood watching me across 20 paces of frozen ground, not fleeing, not approaching, simply watching with an attention that felt less like an animal's caution than like a question being asked. I did not understand it then. I only knew that when I turned back toward the keep, toward the one lit window I always found myself seeking out from that field, the wolf turned its head the same direction, as though it, too, already knew where my path led before I had admitted it to myself. That same winter, I had ridden 2 days to the valley towns to settle a grain dispute among 3 quarreling millers, and had come back through a storm that stranded half my escort in a shepherd's barn overnight. Eloin had waited up for the returning riders with hot broth and dry blankets laid out in the lower hall, not because any steward had ordered it of her, but because, as she told me plainly when I asked, she had grown up in a house where a horse doctor's daughter learned early that the waiting was its own kind of medicine. I found her asleep sitting upright at the trestle table near dawn, a blanket still folded in her lap meant for whichever rider came in last and coldest, and I remember standing over her for a long moment simply watching her breathe before I gently took the blanket from her hands and covered her with it instead. She woke enough to protest that the blankets were meant for the men off the road, not for her. I told her she had ridden no easier road than any of them, tending a hall through a night she did not have to tend, and she had huffed at that in the particular way she had of pretending my kindness annoyed her, when in truth I think it only startled her, as though she had not expected a king to notice the small hours she gave away so freely. It was around that same season that I began bringing her small things from my travels, not jewels, for she would have refused those outright and likely scolded me for the waste of coin, but oddities that seemed to suit her. A pressed mountain flower from the eastern passes that did not grow anywhere near Thistlewood, a smooth gray stone from a riverbed where I had watered my horse and thought, absurdly, of the color of her eyes. She kept every one of them in a small wooden box on her windowsill, and I did not learn until much later, from her own confession at our marriage feast, that she had begun to understand what I could not yet say to her long before I understood it myself, simply by counting how many days I had gone without bringing her some new small thing, and how restless I seemed on those days, as though I had misplaced something and could not say what. I should have named the whole of it then. I should have stood in my own council chamber and told them plainly that the old promise between Thistlewood and the Raineth Valley, a duty match drawn up between my father and Sables, back when I was a boy too young to have any say in my own future, was a debt I intended to settle with coin and courtesy, not with my hand in marriage. I should have said it before the whole keep began to whisper that the match was only a matter of season and ceremony, before those whispers reached a woman with flower-white wrists and a spine too proud to compete with a treaty. Instead, I let the whispers grow because I believed, wrongly, foolishly, that Eloin already knew where my heart had settled, and that the knowing did not need saying. I was wrong on both counts. The whispers came to a point at the spring gathering, the one feast each year where every lesser house of my kingdom rides in to renew its oaths. My seneschal, meaning no unkindness, had seated Eloin among the household stewards at the lower tables, as her station required, while a chair of honor stood empty at my right hand, kept, everyone understood without needing to be told, for whichever Raineth envoy might arrive to represent the match everyone assumed would soon be sealed. I watched Eloin see that empty chair. I watched her understand its meaning before a single herald announced anything. She said nothing. She only inclined her head to me across the width of the hall, the correct and distant courtesy of a household steward toward her king, and ate her supper without once looking toward that empty seat again. I told myself, coward that I was, that her silence meant she had made her peace with it. I have since learned that a woman's silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is only the shape grief takes when it has decided not to ask for comfort it does not expect to be given. It was 2 months after that feast. On a night I had ridden in late from the eastern watch with rain in my collar and no appetite for my own haul, that I found her still awake in the account room, tallying grain stores by a single candle, though the hour was well past midnight. I remember standing in that doorway far longer than courtesy allowed, simply watching the candlelight move over her hands, and thinking, with a clarity that frightened me even as it settled something in my chest, that I would rather stand in a doorway watching this woman work by candlelight than sit at the head of any feast Thistlewood had ever set. I said none of it aloud. I only asked whether she had eaten, and when she admitted she had not, I sat across from her and shared the cold bread and cheese my own kitchens had left out for me, and we talked of nothing important, a dispute over a boundary hedge, a lamed cart horse, the coming frost, until the candle guttered low. It was, I think now, one of the happiest hours of my life, and I let it pass without once telling her so. The night before all of it came to its reckoning, I had gone looking for Eloan in the account room and found it dark, her ledgers closed and stacked with a finality I had never seen her give them before. I searched the lower hall, the kitchens, the herb garden where she sometimes walked when a matter troubled her, and found her at last on the low wall above the stable yard, wrapped in the same cloak she would wear the next day to walk out my gate, looking east toward the Raineth encampment's distant watch fires. "You are counting their fires," I said, coming to stand beside her, though not too close, for something in her stillness that night warned me against presuming closeness I had not earned. "I am only watching how many there are," she said. It seemed a smaller thing than watching how many days are left before the herald announces a date. She did not look at me. "I have decided something, Ewan, and I would rather tell you plainly than have you learn it from a steward's whisper the way I have learned everything else these 3 years. My chest went tight in a way no border skirmish had ever managed. "Tell me then." "I am going to leave before you have to choose between telling me to go and asking Sable Raineth to wait one more season, while you find the courage to end it properly. I will not make you into a man who has to choose cruelty toward one woman or the other. I would rather remove myself from the choosing altogether." She finally turned to look at me, and there was no accusation in her face, only a terrible, gentle certainty that frightened me far more than anger would have. "You have never once been unkind to me, Ewan. I want to leave before that changes, and before I no longer have the strength to go without resenting you for a debt that was never truly yours to owe me." I did not understand that night that she meant it plainly and immediately, and not as some far-off resolution to be revisited once the frost came, as I had half assumed from her earlier words in the tower. I told her foolishly that I would set the matter right, that she should trust me a little longer, and she had only nodded in the way one nods at a kindness one no longer expects to be honored, and gone in from the cold without another word. I did not know, riding out before dawn the next morning toward the Raineth camp, that I had already spent the last of the time she had been willing to wait, and that only chance and Sable's own clear sight would give me any road back to her at all. The morning after that quiet, unbearable conversation on the stable wall, I rode out before dawn to the Raineth encampment at the edge of my land, where Sable's envoy had pitched silk tents like a rebuke to my delay. I meant to end it. I meant to ride there and tell Sable's father, Lord Corin Raineth, that whatever debt of alliance my father had signed away, I would pay it in trade roads and grain shipments and the safety of his border towns, but not in a wife I did not choose. Sable herself met me before I reached her father's tent. She was a tall woman, handsome and clear-eyed, with none of the softness court gossip liked to paint on rival women, and she watched me dismount with an expression that told me she had already read my face before I opened my mouth. "You have come to release me," she said. "I have come to speak with your father." "You have come to release me," she said again, gentler this time, "and I confess, Ewan, I am relieved to hear it, though you have not yet said the words." She folded her hands. I have watched you for 2 years look at that account keeper of yours the way my own husband, may his memory rest, once looked at me before he died in the fever winter. I have no wish to marry a man who wears another woman's name behind his eyes. I stood there in the cold with the wind pulling at my cloak, foolish with relief and shame both. You knew. Everyone at your table knew, my lord, save perhaps the 2 people it concerned. Sable's mouth curved, not unkindly. I only wondered how long you would let it cost her before you found your courage. My counsel will not thank either of us for this. Your counsel has never once had to walk into a hall and see a chair kept empty at another woman's expense, Sable said, and there was no unkindness in it, only the plain sight of a woman who had watched more than she had ever been asked her opinion on. I will speak to my father myself. He values the trade roads more than he values a wedding he only ever wanted for the coin of it. Go home, Ewan, and ride quickly. I think you have less time than you believe. I did not understand the last of what she said until hours later, and by then it had already nearly cost me everything. I rode back to Thistlewood with that warning lodged under my ribs like a second heartbeat, and I did not yet know how dearly it would ask to be answered. I reached the keep by mid-afternoon to find the North Tower room empty, the shawl folded exactly where she had left it the night before, and my steward waiting with his hat already in his hands, the way men hold things when they expect to be shouted at. She left an hour past noon, my lord, on foot with the satchel. She said she meant to reach the low road and take the carrier's cart to the valley towns before dark. Why did no one send word to me? We did not know where to send it, my lord, and she asked us plainly not to trouble you with it until she was already gone. She said, the steward hesitated, and I saw the cost it took him to finish. She said she did not want to be argued out of the one thing she still had left to choose for herself. An hour, on foot. I had ridden 3 hours to release a promise she did not yet know was released, and in that same window she had walked out through my own gate without a single soul thinking to stop a free woman from leaving a keep that had never once called her its prisoner. My huntmaster, hearing the commotion, came into the yard already reading my face the way old soldiers learn to read weather. My lord, let me send riders ahead to the low gatehouse. They can hold the gate warden's cart until. No, the word came out harder than I intended. If she is stopped by anyone's hand but mine, she will only believe she was right to have gone. I will not have her caught like a fugitive. I mean to ask her, not command her. I did not wait for my horse to be resaddled. I took the first one in the stable yard, a bay mare still lathered from the morning's exercise, and I put her to the departure road at a pace that made my huntmaster shout after me in alarm. The road out of Thistlewood runs along the shoulder of the eastern ridge before it drops down through birch woods to the low gatehouse, the old stone one my grandfather built to check merchants' tolls, long since given over to nothing grander than housing the gate warden and his family. It was toward that gatehouse that I rode, because it was the only crossing point before the carrier's road, and because some certainty older than reason told me she would not yet be past it. Halfway down the ridge, a gray shape broke from the birch line and ran alongside the mare for the length of 3 fields. The same thin-ribbed wolf, or its like, that had watched me across the frozen pine break 2 winters before, keeping easy pace at my flank as though it, too, had somewhere urgent to be. I had never in my life seen a free wolf run beside a rider that way, without fear, without hunger, simply present, and some part of me that had no words for what it knew took the sight as neither omen nor accident but as company. It peeled away at the tree line above the gatehouse, vanishing into the birches the moment the old stone arch came into view below, and I did not have breath to spare wondering at it further. I want to tell you I felt the bond the way old songs claim, a howl of recognition, a fire lit all at once. It was not that. What I felt, cresting the ridge and seeing her small dark shape far below on the pale road, was stillness, a stillness that had nothing to do with calm. It was the stillness of a held breath, the stillness of the half-second between letting an arrow loose and hearing whether it has found its mark, stretched out until it became unbearable, as though every part of me that had ever moved without thinking had simply stopped, waiting to see whether she would turn. She did not turn. She kept walking, satchel over one shoulder, cloak drawn against the wind coming down off the ridge, her back straight as a drawn bowstring, and something in that unbending posture told me more plainly than any words could have that she was not walking away in anger. She was walking away because she had decided, with terrible calm, that this was simply what must be done, and she meant to do it without asking anyone to make it easier for her. That, I think, is when I understood what I stood to lose. Not a woman who might rage at me, who might turn and demand explanations, who might be reasoned with or apologized to. A woman who would simply go, quietly, and never once let me see what it had cost her. I put my heels to the mare, and rode down that ridge road faster than I have ridden into any battle. The wind carried my name before it carried anything else, some cry from the gate warden's boy, who had seen me coming and shouted it down the slope in warning or welcome. I never asked which. Aloan's steps did not slow. If anything, they quickened, and the sight of her walking faster because she had heard me coming struck a blow no raider's blade had ever managed. Aloan, my voice cracked on it, unkingly, unguarded. I did not care. She stopped at the gatehouse arch itself, one hand already on the old stone as if she meant to steady herself before whatever came next, and turned. Not toward me with hope, not toward me with anger. She turned with the same composure she had shown, folding her shawl, chin level, eyes dry. And that dry-eyed steadiness was the cruelest thing I had ever seen a person do to me, because I understood in an instant that she had already grieved this in private alone, without asking me to witness it, and had come out the other side of that grief resolved. "You should not have ridden so hard," she said. "You will lame that mare on the ridge stones." "Aloan, there is no match. There will be no match. I rode to the Raineth camp this morning and released the promise myself." I swung down before the mare had fully stopped, stumbling on the packed road in a way no Alpha King should stumble in front of his own gate warden's family, and did not care about that either. "Sable herself sent me back to you. She said I have worn your name behind my eyes for 2 years, and she was not wrong, and I am ashamed it took her saying it plainly for me to ride after you instead of simply telling you the truth a season ago." Something moved behind Aloan's composure then, not tears, not yet, but a flicker, quick as a hand drawn back from a flame. "You released it," she said slowly, testing the words the way she might test a bone to see if it was truly set. "Before you knew I was leaving." "Before. I did not know you had already gone until I returned and found the room empty and your steward wringing his hat." I stepped closer, close enough now to see that her calm was a held thing, a door braced shut with both hands. "I did not ride after you to stop you from doing something I feared. I rode after you because I had already decided, this morning, in the cold outside Corin Raineth's tent, that there was no future I wanted that did not have you standing in the middle of it, and I could not bear one more hour of you not knowing that. You let me sit at the spring gathering and watch an empty chair kept for another woman," she said, and here at last her voice thinned, though it did not break. "You let the whole hall believe it before you ever let me believe anything else. Do you know what it costs, Ewan, to smile through a feast while the entire room waits for a wedding you were never told you'd need to survive?" "I know. I have no defense for it except that I was a coward who mistook silence for kindness, and I have spent every day since that feast regretting that I let you learn the shape of my future from a servant's gossip rather than from my own mouth. I did not look away from her, though it would have been easier. You deserved to hear it from me first every time, and I failed you at every turn where it mattered. I am not asking you to forget that failure. I am only asking you to let me stand here and answer for it before you walk past this gate believing it was ever a fair trade, your dignity for my silence. Here is the strange thing about a bond 3 years in the growing, quiet and unnamed the whole time. It does not announce itself with thunder when it is finally acknowledged. It settles. That is the truest word I have for what happened in me as I stood before her at that gatehouse arch. Not a howl, not a surge, but a settling, like a key turning home in a lock that had been rattled and tried 1,000 times but never once properly closed. Every restless thing in me, every night I had lain awake certain some catastrophe waited just past the horizon, every hour I had spent pacing my own hall for reasons I refused to name, all of it went quiet at once, folded down into a single certainty as plain and unspectacular as a table set for supper. This is the missing thing. It had been missing so long I had built my whole life around its absence without ever naming the shape of the whole. Eloan's hand had not left the stone of the gate arch. You cannot know that from one cold morning, Ewan. I have known it for longer than one morning. I have simply been a coward about saying it. I made myself hold her eyes, though it cost me more than facing the raider's hook blade ever had. I told myself the treaty was a debt of honor I owed my father's memory. That was a lie I found comfortable because it let me keep you close without ever risking the asking. I let you sit at my table for 3 years, warm your hands at my hearth, mend half the keep's grievances with that steadiness of yours, and I let the whole court whisper about Sable Raineth rather than stand up once and say the truth in front of them. That failure is mine. I do not ask you to forgive it standing in a road. I ask only that you not walk through this gate before I have said it once, plainly, the way I ought to have said it a year ago. Say it then. Her voice had thinned further, not with weakness, but the way ice thins just before it gives. I love you. Not as fondness, not as the ease of an old habit. I love you the way a man loves the one true center he did not know he was missing until she stitched his arm shut in a kitchen and scolded him for his own foolishness in the same breath. I do not want Sable Raineth's name beside mine on any treaty. I want yours beside mine at my own table, in front of my own council, for every year I have left to live. I should have said this before you ever had cause to pack that satchel. I am saying it now at this gate, because it is the only place I have left to say it, and I will not let you walk past this arch believing for one more hour that you were ever the one being set aside. The stillness broke in her then, all at once, the way a held breath finally releases, not into weeping, though her eyes did shine at last, but into a long, unsteady exhale that seemed to loosen every careful line of her shoulders. The satchel slid from her grip and struck the road with a soft, forgotten thud, and neither of us moved to retrieve it. I told myself I would not beg you to choose me, she said low. I told myself that if I had to ask, it would already be worth less than if you simply knew. So I decided I would rather go with my dignity whole than stay, and watch you marry another woman out of duty, while I smiled at the wedding feast and called it loyalty. You never once had to beg. That is the whole of my shame, Eloan, that you should have had to consider begging at all, when the choosing was never in question anywhere except inside my own stubborn silence. I reached for her hand, slow, giving her every chance to withdraw it, and when she did not, I closed my fingers around hers as though I were closing them around something I had nearly let the wind take. There is more, I said, because I found, now that the door in me had finally opened, that I could not close it again halfway. I have a box on my own windowsill, Eloan, though you have never seen it, kept beside the one I gave you full of river stones and mountain flowers. Mine holds a scrap of the apron you wore the night you stitched my arm, which I begged off the laundress under some excuse about needing it for a physician's record, and which I have kept for 3 years like a man keeping a relic of something he was too much of a coward to name a faith. I did not understand, until I stood on that ridge this morning, and saw you walking away from me, that I had already built my whole life around the certainty of you without ever once asking you to share in the certainty yourself. That is the debt I mean to spend the rest of my years repaying, if you will let me. Her breath caught audibly, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the wind moving between us the only sound on that quiet road. "Come back through the gate with me," I said again, gentler now. "Not because I command it, because I am asking for the first time instead of assuming you already understood." For a moment she only looked at me, and in that look I saw the whole of the last 3 years pass between us. The kitchen stool, the mended arm, the 100 quiet suppers, the empty chair at the spring feast, the whispers she had swallowed without complaint, the folded shawl she had believed would be the last thing she packed in my house. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand within mine until our palms met flat, a gesture so small and so enormous that I felt it more than the crown had ever weighed on my brow. "Then I am choosing to come back," she said. "Not because you rode fast enough to catch me, because you finally said it standing still." We walked back up through the gate arch together, the satchel left forgotten on the road for the gate warden's boy to carry up after us, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I ought to have this old stone arch recut with some marker of the day, some grand words for what had happened beneath it. I did not, in the end. Some things are better kept exactly as small and plain as they truly were. A woman who stopped walking, and a man who finally found the courage to ask instead of assume. Halfway up the ridge road, where the birches thinned and the keep's lit windows first came into view, Aloan stopped and looked back once toward the tree line. I followed her gaze and saw the gray wolf again, sitting easy at the wood's edge as though it had waited there the whole while, watching us with that same unhurried attention I had first met 2 winters before. Aloan studied it a long moment, then looked at me with something between wonder and quiet accusation. "You never told me you had a friend out there," she said. I did not know how to explain him to myself, let alone to you. I watched the wolf rise, turn, and vanish unhurried into the birches, the way it always did, as though its only errand had been to see for itself that the road had been walked to its proper end. I think now he has been telling me for 2 winters what I was too stubborn to hear from my own heart. I am only sorry it took me so long to listen. "Then we are both slow learners," she said, and for the first time that day she smiled. The court did not take the news gently, at first. My counsel had spent a decade anticipating the Raineth match, and there were men among them who muttered about broken alliances and unsteady borders for a full season after. Lord Havard, eldest of my father's old advisers, came to my hall the very week and asked plainly whether I understood what I risked setting aside a treaty 2 kings had built. I told him what I had told Sable's father in the cold outside his tent, that the border would be kept safe by trade and treaty and my own word as king, and that my heart was not a province to be parceled out by inheritance. He was not satisfied. Few of the old guard were, at first. But I noticed, through that difficult season, how often those same men found their way to the account room to have some dispute untangled by a woman with steady hands and a fairer ear than any of them had expected, and how grudging respect has a way of outlasting grudging disapproval, given enough seasons to work on it. Lord Havard himself came round before the others, though he would never have named it that way. It happened the week a dispute arose between 2 border villages over a shared well that had run low in a dry summer, a dispute that had already cost 1 man a broken hand in a scuffle, and threatened to cost the peace of the whole eastern valley if it went unsettled. Havard brought it to my council expecting a ruling by decree, the old way, 1 village favored, and the other made to accept it under my seal. Aloan, sitting at the account table nearby as she often did by then, asked quietly whether anyone had thought to measure the well's depth against each village's actual need, rather than simply dividing the water by old boundary lines that had nothing to do with thirst. No one had. She rode out herself within the week, measured the flow with the same steady patience she had once given my wounded arm, and returned with a plan that satisfied both villages without a single seal or decree required. Havard watched the whole matter resolve itself and said nothing for a long moment, and then, gruffly, that he supposed a treaty was only ever as good as the peace it kept, and that he had rarely seen peace kept so plainly as by a woman with a measuring cord and no title at all. It was the closest thing to an apology I ever heard him give, and Aloan, to her credit, never once asked for a grander one. Sable herself sent a wedding gift the following spring, a length of pale valley wool, woven by her own women with a short note in her own hand, for the account keeper who taught a king to count what actually mattered. Aloan kept that wool and had it made into a shawl, the very kind she had once folded into a satchel meaning to leave my house forever, and she wears it still on the coldest mornings, though I have never told her how much it costs me, every time I see it, to remember how close I came to letting her walk out from under it entirely. We were married at midsummer, not in the grand cathedral hall my father had used for his own vows, but in the kitchen courtyard where I had first sat bleeding on a stool while she scolded me for my own recklessness. It seemed the only honest place for it. Half the keep thought it strange that their king should choose a courtyard over a cathedral. Aloan only laughed when she heard the whispering, and said that a king who had learned honesty in a kitchen owed it to himself to keep his vows in one too. My steward, who had once stood wringing his hat before me in fear of my temper, stood that day instead near the courtyard well with an expression of plain relief, as though the whole household had been holding its breath alongside me, and had only just now, at last, let it go. We kept the same stool from that first night, worn smooth by 3 years of kitchen use, and set it beside the small table where the marriage cup was poured, though neither of us sat on it during the ceremony itself. It stood there instead as a kind of witness, the way some houses keep an old sword or a grandmother's ring displayed at a wedding to remind the gathered guests where a family's fortune first began. Aloan wore no grand gown for the occasion, only pale linen with a modest collar and her mother's plain shawl pinned at the shoulder, and when I told her afterward that she had outshone every jewel in my treasury without wearing a single one, she said only that she had never needed borrowed light to be seen by the one person whose seeing had ever mattered to her. Sable did not attend, having returned by then to her own valley to see to her father's aging holdings, but she sent word through a rider that reached us the very morning of the ceremony, wishing us both the kind of ordinary happiness, as she put it, that no treaty had ever managed to arrange on purpose. There is a small ceremony we have kept between the two of us since, one no herald announces and no chronicler records. Each year, on the day I caught her at the gatehouse, we walk that same stretch of road together at dusk, from the ridge down to the old stone arch, and we say nothing at all until we reach the gate. It is not grand. It is not sung about in any hall. It is only the two of us retracing, on purpose and without hurry, the distance I once let grow between us out of cowardice, so that neither of us ever forgets how close a settled heart can come to being mistaken for a duty, nor how much courage it costs in the end, simply to say the plain truth to the person standing right in front of you. Last summer, walking that road with our daughter asleep against my shoulder and Aloan's hand loose and easy in mine, she stopped at the very stone where her satchel had once fallen, and looked at me with the particular quiet amusement she still keeps for moments when she thinks I am being sentimental. "You still slow your steps here," she said, "every year. As if you are afraid I might keep walking." "Every year," I admitted, "some old part of me checks that you did not." She reached up and set her palm flat against my chest, over the place where that first strange stillness had settled 3 years before and never once left since, and said nothing more. She did not need to. I had finally learned, standing at that gate a year into our marriage and every year after, that some truths are better held in a hand against a heartbeat than spoken aloud at all, and that the quietest choosing is often the one that lasts the longest. Somewhere past the birch line that evening, faint enough that I could have imagined it, a wolf's call rose and fell once and did not come again, and Aloan tilted her head toward the sound with the small private smile she keeps only for the two of us. "Your friend," she said, "approves." "He always did," I answered, long before I had the sense to. We walked on together past the arch, back up toward the lit windows of the keep, and I did not look back at the road once. There was no longer any need to. Everything I had ever nearly lost on it was walking, warm and unhurried, at my side.